Good afternoon, students, and hope you are doing good. And today my topic is Orientalism, basically, which is the study of East and Islam by the Western scholars. And I would like to share a few screens with you, a few slides with you, and uh, okay, okay. Can Dr. Ott, you have to allow me to share the screen.
Oh,
It says that it has been disabled.
multiple participants can share simultaneously. So hopefully that.
Is it on? Okay.
I believe so.
Okay, yes, I got it.
Go ahead.
Okay, you can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Here we are.
Okay, so basically what happened is that with the age of reason and enlightenment, when the West was growing, and there were also a couple of other factors, and that was one of them was the colonization of the East or many of the Muslim world countries. It all resulted into a new understanding of Islam by the Western scholars, and particularly by the Christian scholars. So that's overall that we will be talking about today. But since Goddard has mentioned some other information, so I'll be just sharing with you in these slides.
Right.
So first of all, Muslims have been studying the religions of the world long before the Christian scholars started, because Christian scholars started studying the Eastern religions and particularly Islam later on, after the age of enlightenment and reason, and particularly after they started the colonization. But Muslim scholars long before has been working on the world religion. So here are some of the examples that I'm showing you over here. Positive Muslim studies of the world religions, it's with compared to, because before this age, many Christian studies of Islam were mainly critical, and it was mostly negative. But later on, we will mention that some scholars, they started working on positively also. But some of the positive Muslim studies of the world religions, and Muslim writers sincerely try to understand the world religions long before the age of enlightenment and reason in the West. And there are few examples are, these names are very popular among the Muslims or in the Islamic historical literature. For example, Tabari is his nickname, that the way it is known as, but his actual name is Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari. And he was in the 9th and the 10th century. And he was the one, actually, he is a historian. So he has written a huge book of several volumes on the general history. He started with Adam, the first human being, and he came all the way to his own age. So, and he mentions a lot of other religions, particularly the Persian religions he mentioned. And we know that in Persia, before the advent of Islam, the religion that was prevailing over there was Zoroastrianism, and which is basically, in Persian language, the word is Zaratasht, which is the name of the Zoroaster. And so Tabari wrote in detail about that. Beside Tabari, Masoudi is also very popular, who died in the middle of the 10th century. And his full name was Abul Hasan Ali al-Masoudi. And he wrote books on Judaism, Christianity, and Indian religions. And as a matter of fact, many of his books on Christianity and Judaism are textbook in several institutes that they are studied over there. The next is the name of Al-Biruni. I'm sure you must have heard his name. Abu Rehan Al-Biruni. He was in the 10th and the 11th century. Originally, he was from the Afghanistan area, but he was a scientist, like he was good in mathematics and several other sciences. But his main achievement is that he wrote an amazing book on the history and the development of Hinduism. And this book is known nowadays as Kitabul Hind, the Book of India. And his actual book is in Arabic language, which has been translated to several. But the good thing about this book is that it's a very positive approach to understand Hinduism. And many Hindu scholars have appreciated Al-Biruni because he is the first ever in the history who wrote on the history of the Hinduism. Actually, I remember reading an article by Gandhi. He said that we are thankful that Al-Biruni preserved our history, which we did not have before, and otherwise we did not even know what he wrote about it. So the good thing about Al-Biruni is that he was very pragmatic. His approach was, he went to India, to the main center of the Hinduism, which was Ajmer Sharif, and he learned the Sanskrit language, which was the original language of the Hindu scriptures. And then he stayed over there for 10 years. And he went through the original sources of Hinduism and their scriptures. And then he wrote a book. The title of the book in Arabic language is تحقيق ما للهند من مقولة مقبولة في العقل أو مرزولة. It's a long title, but it means that whether you agree or you don't agree, you believe or you don't believe, your mind accepts or not, but this is what the Hinduism is. So this is a very interesting book. And his language is very difficult because when I was teaching in a university in Pakistan, I was given a course in which part of his book was included in the text. And it was very difficult Arabic to understand. But anyway, his book on Hinduism is one of the early books on the history of Hinduism. Now, the other name which is very popular in Muslim world is the Shahristani. Tajuddin al-Shahristani is the first ever person who wrote a first ever book on the world religions. The Arabic name of his book is Al-Milal wa Nihal, which is translated as the Book of Sects and Creeds. So he talks generously about all the world religions, Christianity, Judaism, and their sects and different branches and scriptures and everything. He really goes into details. So that is what was there on the side of the Muslim scholars before Western scholars started writing about Islam or other religions. Now let's see that how the Islamic studies are the study of the religion of Islam started in the West. So in the next slide, I will show you some dates. The beginning of the study of Islam in the West. So it all started after the 16th century. And that was the time when the government and they started, there was a industrial revolution, scientific revolution. They started traveling everywhere. The colonization kind of starting place. And then, so this helped them and this encouraged them and caused them to know more about Islam. So the first chair of Arabic in Collège de France, in France, it was established in 1539. Well, Arabic does not mean only the Arabic language, but it means the study of Islam, because the sources of Quran, the life of the Prophet, the early history of Islam, everything was in Arabic only. So these departments that was established to study Arabic were basically studying Islam and Muslim in general. Now, the first time the Arabic in 1586. The chair of Arabic in the University of Leiden in Netherlands, it was started in 1613. And then in Oxford and Cambridge, the Arabic studies started in 1630s. So that was the time when in the West, an academic approach started with respect to Islam. It was not just a biased theological approach that has been there before, but this time it was more like academic and subjective. Now, the first English translation was done by Alexander Ross. He was a Scottish scholar, and it was since the earliest translation, it has a lot of flaws. And I recently went over a PhD thesis on a critical study of Alexander Ross' English translation. So, but later on, many other Western scholars, they improved in their English translation. But this was the first one in the history, and that was in 1649. Adrian Reland was
Dr.
the
Hawk,
first scholar. Yes.
I hate to interrupt, but you say that the first English translation of the Quran had many different had many flaws that needed to be corrected.
Well, it was right. It was like the order of the chapter was different, and because Alexander Ross has its own understanding of the Quran.
I see.
Many.
Interestingly, parallel to that, oftentimes in studies about English translations of the Bible, the common misconception is that it's been translated so often that its reliability has been lost over time. But it's similar to this. It's actually true that the more scholars get access to older and older manuscripts, the more accurate they can hone the process and sharpen the process and be even more accurate as they go. So oftentimes the earlier translations aren't the most accurate. It's after that process is the translation process could mature and you get more reliable things later on.
You are right, Professor Ott, because the translation has its own problems. And when anybody who translate any text from one language to another, right, it cannot be translated 100% because every language has their own expressions and phrases, which many of the times it cannot be translated. Maybe it can be explained, but translation is a very difficult thing. And so that's why we have like, I guess, close to 300 English translations of the Quran.
I'm sorry to
because
interrupt.
Everybody is trying to improve.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that seemed like a good parallel to things that we've studied. But I'm sorry to please go on.
Yes, well, you are right, and but the difference between the translations of the Bible and the translation of the Quran is that the Quran has its original Arabic text always there, which can always be compared. Right. But since in many translations, the early translations of the Bible, we have to depend on only those Greek or Latin translations. Right. So that's why sometimes there is a question of dependability. But so anyway, the interesting thing that I want to mention over here, then in 18th century, Arabian Nights was translated first time into German, English, and French. And when it became popular, it became the very popular book among the Western readers. And according to Gerder that we are studying, he says that it became only next to Bible. It was read so much. So Arabian Nights are basically fiction stories, but you learn a big deal about from these about the Islam, Muslims, their culture, their societies, their way of life. So that's what is the basically importance of the Arabian Nights, and particularly the culture of that time of Iraq. which was the center of the Abbasid dynasty, and that was the center of scientific and technological development. So Arabian Nights are really shedding a lot of light on the early development of the Islamic culture and Islamic societies. So this was how the beginning of the Islam was by the Western scholars. Now, what happened is that colonization made a lot of Western people travel into the Muslim world, and which they did not have the first-hand experience of dealing with the Islam or Muslims. Then many writers, scholars traveled in the Muslim world along with the colonization process. And then on the other hand, the West by itself was going through the age of reason and enlightenment. So this all together gave them a new approach to Islam. The understanding of Islam now was getting better with compared to the previous understanding. Like in the last lectures, if you remember, we talked about crusades.
Right.
Among the crusaders, the understanding of Islam was totally different. It was far away from the reality because they have no idea about practically dealing with Muslims or having a first-hand information. Now, the understanding started developing. So, introduction to Islam as a non-mythological and rational religion, that's what it started spreading. That's no, there is not that much mythology like it was previously in the other theologies, but Islam is more like a rational religion. And Prophet Muhammad has been introduced that he was a very just ruler. So these kind of a lot of positive things started also there in many of the books, although there was criticism also, but then it became like more kind of a balanced approach. Now, Edward Gibbon is very popular for his book Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire. And that was the time when the Islam also has shown up on the horizon of the world. So he talks in detail about Islam, Prophet Muhammad, and the other work. So although politically and theologically he's very critical with respect to Islam and Prophet Muhammad, but when it comes to the moral and the social work of the Prophet Muhammad, what kind of people he produced and what kind of community came out overall from the culture and the religion of Islam, he really appreciates it. And he is very positive about this. And he says that Prophet Muhammad was successful in creating a community. The individuals were very spiritual, morally, they were very high character, and socially, it was a very dynamic, active community which was taking care of a lot of things. Besides this, missionaries and travelers understand information about Islam and Muslims. So few examples are this that I have mentioned here is one of them is this lady, Mary Montague. She was the wife of the ambassador of England in Istanbul in the Ottoman Empire. And she was a very learned lady. She has been into the community and society, and being a woman, she has an access to the areas where men did not have an access in the female quarters and the areas of the Ottoman Empire. So, and she wrote books talking about all these details. So this provided another trail of information about the Muslims that Western scholars became more aware. Charles Doughty was another person who spent a lot of time in the Middle East. There was another Dutchman. He spent almost 6 months in Mecca disguised as Muslim, because otherwise he could not have stayed that long there. So he was writing a book on Hajj, the pilgrimage. So he actually participated and lived among the Muslims and learned the language. So, and then besides this, a lot of other products of the Muslim world like rugs and architectural designs and some other crafts and other creative designing work that became very popular in the West. And particularly the Persian rugs and or the Turkish rugs have been very popular and expensive in the Western world. So that this all resulted in a new approach to Islam and the contribution of Islam in the enlightenment of the West. This all became more clear. Now, one example is this, that Edward Blashfield, he is an artist, American artist, who made this painting in 1897, in which he acknowledged the role of Islam in the development, in the modern development of the American society or the Western society. And this painting is there on the ceiling of the Library of Congress reading room, and in which he mentioned 12 countries that participated in the modern world. And besides other, he mentioned Islam also, particularly because of the scientific contribution of Islam and the way Islam contributed in the enlightenment and the reasoning and the science and technology and putting the foundation of many other subjects like that. So this is something that since I knew it, so when I visited last time DC, I went to the Library of Congress, especially over there, and I took some pictures with my own phone. This is when you enter the Library of Congress, the first thing you see is the reading room. And it's right on the reading room, it is a dome structure. And then in the ceiling, this painting is there. So you can see it that the religion of Islam and its contribution has been acknowledged by the Western scholars once they learn more about Islam and the Muslims. Now, the impact on the Christian thinking. The Christian thinking changed when they learned more about Islam. There were new ideas, new thoughts came into the Christian world. And particularly, I want to mention over here 3 things. One is that exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. So these, for example, exclusivism means that salvation is only through Christ and no other religion is included in the salvation, only Christianity and through the Christ and the Christian community. And this is the view which is mostly supported by evangelical Protestant and some of the, some of the Protestant missionaries. And then one name which is very popular in this regard is the missionaries Barth and Creamer. They have been working in Indonesia and they interacted with Muslims and Islam over there, and they gave their own very skeptical views about Islam, that it's a very superficial religion, and this is a religion which has no answer and no question and all that. So, but anyway, this is one approach which has been there before. But inclusivism is a non-Christian can also be saved through Christ. And this is the approach by the Roman Catholics. And Nicholas and Louis Messinon are the 2 particular names that they came up with this idea. And as Professor Ott will be talking in detail in future about the Second Vatican Council, in Second Vatican Council, which took place in 1965, the Catholic Council came out openly there are a lot of positive things about Islam. And they accepted that in that Vatican Council officially, that Muslims worship the same God, Almighty, and they pray to him and they fast and they give charity for that. And of course, the Muslim theological understanding of Christ is different, but some of the things have been mentioned. So that later on developed that, yes, there is some truth in Islam also, which is kind of an inclusive approach that we find. And finally, pluralism. And there developed some liberal Protestants this idea that salvation is possible outside the Christianity also. And the other religious communities can have the salvation through their own religious system. And this is not very popular, but it is still an approach which is by liberal Protestants. And I have some names over here, like, for example, the one of the name which is very popular is the Canadian Wilford Cantwell Smith. He is a very champion of this, and he has written a book which is called Islam in the Modern History, in which he comes up with a lot of ideas that I know many Muslims that they have a understanding of God better than many Christians. That's what he says. So anyway, these are some of the trends of understanding Islam by the Western scholars and some of the impact that I wanted to make a point in our today's video.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
interestingly, a good subject for future discussion is the differences between inclusivism and pluralism are, they're really nuanced. It might not be easy to define the difference between.
Very close, very close.
Right, very close. So I think for inclusivism, particularly say with Roman Catholic theologians, the emphasis they still try to place the emphasis on Christ, but that his grace somehow spills out on everybody else, regardless of whether or not they know Christ. And whereas pluralism tends to see that as, well, Christ is our way. Christ is the way we get to God, but that's just one way. Everybody else may have their way. So that's it. But again, they are very close, and so it's interesting talking to scholars, seeing how they parse those out.
Yeah, and again, these are not really watertight, like strictly Catholic or liberal Protestants. Here and there, you will see some other scholars from the same Christian tradition. They may be thinking differently.
Right, sure. So, thank you very much, Dr. Hawk. I'll go ahead and I'll stop our recording now.
Okay.